This food is horrible, and I'm going to die with this taste in my mouth. The sentence cut through the heavy silence of the cell, an unexpected confession from someone whose name was marked by darkness. He had killed 17 people, 17 lives. Taken, faces erased from the memory of justice and the victims. Yet, as the clock ticked down, his last concern wasn't guilt, fear, or even regret. It was the seasoning of the meal he was about to devour. What could drive a man, capable of such brutality, to fixate on such banal details as the taste of food before death? Have you ever stopped to think about what a serial killer says when he knows he's out of time? What he chooses to talk about? What you're about to discover now may surprise you. The right to a last meal is one of the prison system's strangest and most paradoxical traditions. A humane gesture in a setting where humanity has been forcibly stripped away. A moment when the condemned man seems to gain a last shred of control over something he could never control, his own life. But this last meal, far from being just a dish on a plate, reveals deep layers of the criminal mind. The dark psychology that inhabits those who have crossed the final line. Is complaining about food before execution just a whim? Or a silent cry to show that, even in the face of death, there is still life, however tiny, pulsing within one's consciousness? Imagine the scene: a cold cell, the crushing silence, and the inescapable presence of fate. In the midst of it all, a man who has dragged other lives into the abyss, who manipulates, threatens, and destroys without remorse, now finds himself fragile before a tray. The menu, seemingly simple, becomes the center of his attention. He rejects the sauce, detests the texture of the steak, complains about the rice not being like the rice of his childhood. These seemingly trivial details are powerful revelations. They reveal an inner world where control is the ultimate bargaining chip. Controlling food is controlling oneself, even if only for a few hours, even in a scenario of irrevocable condemnation. It's hard not to feel a chill at the thought that these men, the most feared, the most cold, have their flaws, their weaknesses, their obsessions. They, who were monsters to the world, are human to themselves, at least in this final moment. The indignation at the wrong flavor, the irritation at the cold food, the disgust at the poorly prepared dish. These are fragments of a devastated ego trying to resist the inevitable. Every word, every complaint is a fine line between despair and arrogance, between remorse and denial. They are fragments of what remains after the trail of blood, the shock, the pain. But these aren't just isolated details. They're clues to understanding criminal psychology in its starkest light, that of an unredeemable farewell. Food, once merely nourishment, now becomes a symbol, a stage for the final act. It's in the rejected flavor, the rejected texture, that these killers reveal something of their true feelings. Something they didn't say in interviews, depositions, or trials. Something that doesn't fit into trials or investigations. Something that can only be captured in the cruel simplicity of bad taste. Have you ever experienced this, even if you've never set foot in a prison? Have you ever felt the need for control, however small, amidst the chaos? That last complaint, that seemingly insignificant detail, echoes like a silent scream of power, fear, and regret mingled. It's a riddle that straddles the line between the monstrous and the human. What lurks behind these words? What do they say about the mind that led to the conviction? What might these details about the last meal reveal about the crimes that terrify and the man who committed them? What follows is not just a list of names or numbers. It is a journey through the final hours of these 7 serial killers. Men who did not ask for forgiveness, who did not seek redemption. Men who, in the electric chair, the gas chamber, or lethal injection, chose to complain about food as if they could still defy death, or perhaps even themselves. Before the final silence, they spoke. And what they said was disturbing. Now let us unravel these voices. These last words that echo like a dark omen. If there's one thing that intrigues even those who've never delved into the dark world of death row, it's this almost surreal tradition of the last meal. Illegal. Right, in some US states, it allows the condemned to choose their final feast before facing their final sentence. It may seem like a small, even bizarre detail, given the gravity of so many heinous crimes. But this choice reveals much more than a simple gastronomic preference. It lays bare one of the last vestiges of humanity and, paradoxically, a moment of absolute power amidst total loss. Imagine the impact. A person who took lives, destroyed families, and left lasting scars on society, suddenly enveloped in the silence of a prison cell, has the right to choose what to eat before being executed. Does this seem like an act of kindness from the system? Or is it a ritual that exposes the cruelest side of control? After all, if you had killed dozens of people, if you had become a monster recognized by the law and the press, why would you care about the taste of your dinner? The question touches on something fundamental about criminal psychology, about decisions and hidden desires. Even in the final hours, the last meal isn't just a choice of food. It's a symbol, a way for the condemned to exert a control they no longer have over their own lives. In a world where everything has been taken from them, freedom, dignity, a future, that moment when they can say, "I want this," is a final cry of authority, an assertion of the ego in the face of the inevitability of death. It's almost a silent challenge to justice, a moment when the condemned don't passively accept their sentence, but claim a shred of autonomy, a small stage for their final performance. It's not just about flavor or taste, but about identity, about who they still believe they are, even when everything around them crumbles. This ritual carries with it a complex symbolism that transcends the literal. It is the point of contact between the world of the living and the certainty of death. It is the passage between a life marked by choices, some unthinkable, others monstrous, and the nothingness that comes after. In choosing the menu, there's an attempt to maintain control, an effort to make the moment bearable, a way of denying the absolute vulnerability that execution entails. The details of the last meal, the complaints about the dish, what was accepted or rejected, become clues to the mental state of these men, their obsessions, and their resistance to dehumanization. It's no wonder that many experts in dark criminology and criminal psychology see something beyond the obvious in this choice. It's a window into the transformation that occurs in the minds of those who know their time is up. The meal becomes a reflection of the mindset they've imposed on themselves for years, the masks they've worn to hide from pain and guilt, or even their denial of their own condition. It's a moment when masks fall, but also when the personality crystallizes in a disturbing way between ultimate arrogance and quiet desperation. Behind the scenes of this ritual, the revelations are surprising. Some choose simple, almost childish dishes, seeking comfort and nostalgia. Others prefer luxurious meals, a final indulgence they may never have experienced. Some convicts, however, reject everything, complain about the food, transforming the moment into a scene of tension that goes beyond the physical, delving deep into the symbolism of power and resistance. The impact of these decisions extends beyond the cell. It echoes in the minds of those who follow the proceedings, provoking reflections on what constitutes justice, humanity, and punishment. It's clear that this final meal is a microcosm of these men's inner conflict. Their choice of food reveals a universe of conflicting emotions: fear, anger, denial, and paradoxically, a desire for control that persists until their final seconds. While the world judges them for their crimes, they reveal themselves vulnerable in small ways, as if food were the last thread connecting them to something familiar, something that allows them to face the hidden truth they know they can no longer escape. Furthermore, this tradition reveals much about the very society that allows this right. A system that recognizes the end but grants a final moment of choice. A final concession to human dignity, even to those who have taken it from so many others. It's a paradox that fuels heated debates among jurists, psychologists, criminologists, and the general public. What is the real meaning of this meal? Is it a gesture of mercy, a symbol of hypocrisy, or a way to humanize the monstrous? The answer perhaps lies in the complexity of decisions involving death and justice, where nothing is black and white. And while we ponder these meanings, one thing remains clear: the last meal is a mirror into the mind of the condemned, a way to access a profound and often overlooked aspect of criminal psychology, what they think, feel, and do when death is too close to avoid. These moments reveal more than confessions or regrets. They expose the essence of a mindset marked by power, pain, and the inevitability of the end. So it's not just about food. It's about the final decision, the final act of control in a scenario where power was long lost. A moment charged with meaning that invites us to look beyond the crime, into the human complexity that inhabits even those who commit the worst acts. This is the hidden truth these seemingly banal details present to us, an invitation to understand the psychological impact of imminent death on the human mind, an impact that manifests itself in small choices, gestures, and even the most unexpected complaints. What do these complaints about the last meal really hide? Are they signs of arrogance, fear, or simply a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of humanity? What lies behind these desires and rejections? The answer may lie in the stories of these men, in the decisions they made at the last minute, behind the scenes of what seemed like a simple ritual. And it is precisely there that the revelations begin to emerge, to show us that, before the final silence, they spoke and their words still echo. Disturbing and full of meaning. Victor Fager wasn't among the most notorious serial killers, but his case carried a symbolic weight that went beyond his own story. He had taken the life of a doctor in a crime that seemed both thoughtless and cold-hearted, killing to steal a car. The brutality of the act was disturbing in itself, but what came next, in the final hours before his execution, revealed an even more disturbing facet of the human mind. His final request wasn't an elaborate meal, a luxurious indulgence, or a grandiose request. It was something seemingly trivial, almost insignificant: a single olive. Pitted. This unusual request seemed more like a whim or a provocation. But it was when the olive was handed to him, and he realized it was dry, that his reaction revealed what seemed to be an obsession with detail, a psychosis that escaped common understanding. Victor complained, not because he hadn't received enough food, but because of the texture, the flavor, because it didn't correspond to what he had asked for. The dry olive in the final moment of his life became a symbol of his desperate need to control the minimum, the insignificant, the absurd. In the prison system, the last meal was supposed to be a moment when the condemned exercised their last rite, a quasi-sacred ritual that carries, at its core, a complex mix of pain, regret, and paradoxically, power. And Fager, with his single olive, didn't want to surrender completely. He wanted to impose his will, even if it was on a piece of food. The complaint wasn't just about the taste, but about the final line separating man from monster. It was a tiny gesture of resistance, a final whisper of ego before the inevitability of death. This insistence on such a small detail reveals a curious transformation in the condemned man's mindset. In those final moments, the big decisions long since made lost meaning in the face of the urgency to control what was still possible. Food, its taste, its texture, became more than mere physical sensations. They were elements of a silent theater where the condemned man rehearsed his final scene, trying to maintain some authority in a setting where fragility reigned. Criminal psychology finds valuable clues in these details. Fager's fixation on the olive is not an isolated eccentricity, but a window into understanding the impact that imminent death has on the brain, emotions, and decision-making. What seemed like a simple whim, a silly complaint, reveals a hidden truth, fear, despair, and above all, the need to assert oneself in the face of the approaching silence. It's as if, in that moment, the olive represented a last bastion of humanity, an attempt to maintain some dignity when all was already lost. Behind the scenes of this ritual, this complaint resonates like a disturbing echo. It shows that, even among those who have committed monstrous acts, there's a trace of vulnerability and complexity. Victor Fager didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't express regret. He simply wanted his last olive to be perfect. This small, disproportionate demand ends up exposing something greater: the fragility of the mind in the face of the end, the psychological impact of condemnation, and the silent struggle to preserve an identity, even if disfigured. This episode also brings to light a profound reflection on the penal system and the humanity involved in these final moments. By allowing a convicted person to make such a symbolic choice, the state offers a window for the individual to reconnect with themselves, even if only for a few seconds. The last meal is not just food. It is an act of communication, a sign that, despite everything, that person still exists on some level. Fager's complaint, therefore, is not just about the dried olive, but about the existence he tries to cling to as the shadow of death approaches. Analyzing this case, it becomes clear that the psychosis of detail and the control of even the most absurd aspects are part of a larger dynamic. They reflect the struggle between man and the machine of the system, between the torn ego and the irrevocable sentence. And it is in this tenuous space that these small complaints gain meaning. They are not mere complaints, but profound manifestations of a mentality that, even on the brink of death, tries to assert itself, resist, and find meaning, even if that meaning only contains the bitter taste of an olive. Thus, Victor Fager's request becomes a key to unlocking something essential. It's not just about the end, but about what happens to the mind, emotions, and human identity when the end is at hand. The dried olive is a powerful symbol of the transformation that occurs, the invisible impact that fate imposes, and the seemingly small decisions that carry enormous truths. This is the kind of revelation few want to see, but it is fundamental to understanding not only the crime, but the human being behind it. And as we reflect on this singularity, the following stories begin to reveal a disturbing pattern, a succession of behaviors that defy common sense. Because if a man who murdered can fixate on an olive, what did the other condemned men choose? What complaints emerged from the silence? What lies, hidden truths, or delusions were uttered in the final hour? Every detail, every word, is a piece of this dark puzzle that reveals much more than simple complaints about food. It reveals the behind the scenes of a mind in transformation. In shock, faced with what is to come, what do these final complaints really tell us? Perhaps the answer lies in understanding that, even in the final moments, what seems insignificant can carry the weight of a lifetime and a whole story that still needs to be told. Every detail of these final hours holds secrets many prefer to ignore, mysteries that remain in the shadows, waiting to be unraveled. And it is precisely these kinds of stories, those that stir the mind, that expose the human behind the monster, that reveal the unexpected in the final moments, that we want to explore here, together. If you feel this same restlessness, this curiosity that doesn't let the questions rest, being part of this space is more than a choice. It is an invitation to look beyond appearances, to understand what lies hidden behind the decisions that shape destinies. Subscribing to the channel isn't just clicking a button. It's ensuring you won't miss these profound journeys that stir the soul and defy logic. These silent conversations with the darker side of criminal psychology, where each revelation brings a shock, a new layer to our understanding of what truth and transformation mean. By following, you connect with a community that seeks these answers, not for sensationalism, but for a genuine desire to understand what goes on in the shadows that few dare explore. This space was designed to be a refuge for reflection, a place where every story carries weight, where curiosity is respected and nurtured. When you sign up, you're helping to ensure these disturbing voices, these echoes of the past and present, continue to be heard, and that others can access that same light amidst the darkness. The reach of these narratives depends on who decides to stay and dive in, on who seeks the hidden truths behind seemingly trivial complaints, the details that carry a lifetime. So, if you're feeling a desire to know more, a desire to understand the labyrinths of the human mind in its final hours, make this channel your home base. Here, we promise to continue delivering content that not only informs but provokes, that not only reveals but also instigates questions. Because the stories we're beginning to reveal have so much more to tell, secrets that still need to be deciphered, and only together can we follow this path, unraveling this dark puzzle piece by piece. And so, as these words echo, the next story is already unfolding on the horizon. A narrative that will further challenge your certainties, that will reveal the invisible side of what seemed obvious. Follow closely, because each moment, each word, is an essential piece to understanding the complexity that resides in the final hours of those the world judged. Gerald Lee Mitchell wasn't the kind of criminal who sought redemption or mercy. His story was marked by violence and a tortuous path that led him to murder a man over a drug debt, a brutal, merciless crime that sentenced him to prison and eventually the electric chair. But in his final moments, when the sentence could no longer be reversed, a seemingly banal detail caught the attention of onlookers. Before the execution, Gerald asked, his voice low and trembling, if the chicken he was being served was undercooked. "Is this raw?" he asked, almost as if fearing what he was about to swallow. It was a strange question coming from someone who had faced death with an almost frightening coldness on so many other occasions. Gerald wasn't afraid of dying. The fear that shone through him at that moment had a much more specific and human name: salmonella. He didn't want, faced with inevitable death, to fall victim to food poisoning that could add physical suffering to the torments he already faced. It was a final request, a final concern for his body. Even though he knew his final fate was sealed, the scene may seem comical to many, or even tragic in its irony, but it reveals a deep layer of the mindset of these men and women when faced with the end. In their final moments, it's not just great existential fears that haunt them, but also the small, almost banal concerns of everyday life, like the texture of the chicken, the temperature of the food, the taste that they will carry with them into whatever comes next. These concerns reveal a surprisingly human, almost fragile side, hidden behind the walls of cruelty and violence that marked their lives. Did Gerald want to appear human? Perhaps. Or perhaps it was simply a gesture of self-preservation, an attempt to control what he could still control. Because when death is too close to avoid, every small detail becomes a symbol of resistance, a way of affirming that, despite everything, there is still life there, even if it's about to be snuffed out. This request for rare chicken isn't just about food. It's about the psychological impact of imminent death, about the decisions the mind makes when confronted with the hidden truth of the end. What these moments show us goes far beyond the simple act of eating. They lay bare the transformation that occurs within these people, the silent metamorphosis that the proximity of death provokes. Criminal psychology finds here a gold mine for understanding how the mind reacts when it knows time is running out, when life boils down to moments, and every choice, even the simplest, carries immense weight. Gerald, with his trembling voice and doubt about the chicken, is living proof of this. And there's a tragic beauty in this scene, as it blends the absurd and the real, the monstrous and the human. He who took lives, who chose violence as his path, shows himself vulnerable in the face of something as mundane as a meal. This clash between the facets of his personality reveals the complexity of the human being, who can be at once cruel and frightening, but also fragile and full of basic needs. Gerald wasn't just facing human justice in that moment. He was facing his own humanity, with all its contradictions. But this story isn't isolated. It's part of a pattern that repeats itself in the final hours of many condemned prisoners, a pattern that reveals a hidden truth about the nature of fear, power, and identity. The pleas, the complaints, the last words, all of this forms a mosaic that allows us access to the inner workings of the human mind in its rawest and most sincere form. They are small windows into an inner world marked by decisions that, despite seeming insignificant, carry enormous weight. It's fascinating to see how, even when faced with a complete loss of control, these men try to cling to something. Food then becomes much more than sustenance. It's a symbol, a last resort to maintain dignity, to try to control a situation that completely escapes them. Gerald, with his fear of raw chicken, invites us to reflect on how simple decisions can reveal a complex mindset, an internal struggle that goes far beyond what meets the eye. This psychological impact, this silent transformation that unfolds in the final minutes is what calls us to look more closely at the nuances of the criminal mind. And that's where the mystery deepens, where the revelations pile up and force us to rethink everything we thought we knew about these men. Because every detail, every complaint, every word spoken on death row is an essential piece in piecing together the puzzle of what really happens before the silence. And as we look at these fragments, we begin to realize that these men's final hours are not just an end, but a passage laden with meaning. Gerald, with his rare chicken, reminds us that, even at the height of dehumanization, humanity insists on making itself present in small, almost imperceptible, yet powerful gestures. This is the kind of truth that transforms our understanding, that takes us behind the scenes of the criminal mind, to the decisions few know about, and that change everything we thought was right. And it is precisely in this space between the monstrous and the human, between arrogance and fragility, that stories continue to unfold. Because, like Gerald, other names hold their own secrets, their own complaints, their own hidden truths, and these narratives have much to teach us about the complexity of the human mind and the psychological impact of imminent death. Every word spoken, every detail revealed, takes us deeper into this journey that defies comprehension and confronts us with the harsh reality that lies behind the scenes of justice. Ricky Ray Rector made history as a criminal for an act as shocking as it was disturbing. He murdered a police officer, a crime that in itself foretold a grim fate. But what came next crossed the line between tragic and incomprehensible. After the crime, he shot himself in the head, a desperate act, perhaps. An attempt at a definitive escape, which ultimately failed. He survived the shooting, but his mind was no longer the same. The man who rose from that scene had a changed mindset, a profound transformation that eluded simple explanation. In the final moments of his life, Ricky made a request that seemed surreal to many: a pecan pie as his last meal. So far, nothing out of the ordinary. Convicts choose their favorite foods, seeking comfort in flavors that bring back memories, some sense of normalcy. But what truly marked this story was what came next. Ricky ate half of the pie and, surprisingly, left the rest for later. A phrase that seems to carry an almost childish meaning, a veiled hope, or a cutting irony that only a damaged brain could produce. This simple decision, this seemingly innocent gesture, opens the door to profound questions about that man's mindset, about the devastating impact that brain trauma can have on one's perception of reality and the decisions that shape one's end. Did Ricky somehow believe he would return? That he would have a second chance to finish his pie? Or was that phrase merely an expression of a mind disconnected from the world, a silent irony in the face of certain death? It's difficult to separate hidden truth from speculation, But it's precisely this uncertainty that makes the case so fascinating and disturbing. When we reflect on Ricky's request, we realize that a last meal can be much more than a culinary choice. It can be an extension of personality, an expression of what remains of the ego amidst chaos. In his case, pecan pie wasn't just a flavor, it was a symbol of hope, of lost innocence, of a drastic transformation that separated him from the reality around him. The decision to leave half the pie was a gesture fraught with ambiguity, of a mind struggling to make sense of a world that no longer made sense to him. This revelation leads us to understand that behind every last request lies a complex story, an internal struggle that goes beyond the crime committed. It's a silent confrontation between past and present, between consciousness and delirium, between denial and acceptance. Ricky, in his final moments, shows us that the psychological impact of condemnation and imminent death goes far beyond the physical. It reaches deep within the mind, altering perceptions, altering decisions, transforming what might otherwise seem simple into something charged with meaning. This case also makes us reflect on the role of the penal system and society in the face of these very human and at the same time, very dark realities. What happens when justice is confronted with a torn mind that defies norms and expectations? How should we interpret these signs, these decisions that are out of the ordinary, that defy even the most basic logic? These are questions that open the door to debates about ethics, compassion, and the true meaning of punishment. But beyond the legal and philosophical questions, Ricky's request and attitude leave a profound mark on the narrative of the condemned men's final hours. Details like these help us understand the complexity of the transformation they undergo, the internal battles they face, and the true dimensions of the psychological impact of imminent death. These moments, so charged with emotion and contradiction, reveal facets that would be difficult to capture in testimonies or superficial analyses. And it's precisely this complexity that makes these stories so captivating, so unsettling. The last meal, the interrupted order, the gesture of leaving something for later, all of this takes on new meaning when viewed through the lens of criminal psychology and the human experience of the end. These details invite us to look beyond the crime, to see the man behind the monster, and to understand the nuances that make this final stage a journey marked by profound and often disconcerting revelations. Stay with me until the end, because what follows will delve even deeper into this journey through the shadows of the human mind. What you're about to discover may change the way you view not only these men, but also what it means to face life's final hour with all the decisions, doubts, and even ironies that come with it. Follow every word, every detail, because the mystery only deepens, and the revelations are yet to come. Ronnie Lee Gardner was the kind of man who refused to give in, even when all seemed lost. With a record that included the murder of 2 men and a desperate attempt to escape justice, he had already carved his name into the grim record of those condemned to death. But what truly stands out about the final act of his life was not the crime, nor the failed escape, but rather the order he made for his final meal, a seemingly luxurious selection: lobster, steak, apple pie. A feast worthy of someone who, even on the brink of death, demanded absolute control over his surroundings. And yet, amidst that scene of indulgence and power, a simple word revealed a disturbing facet of Ronnie's personality. No onions. I hate onions. His vehement rejection of a seemingly trivial ingredient reveals much more than a culinary preference. It reveals a deep streak of narcissism, the need for everything, absolutely everything, to be perfect according to his own rules, even in the final moments when autonomy is at its lowest. The onion for him was nothing more than a piece of food. It was an affront to his will, an intolerable imperfection. This episode leads us to reflect on how the ego can manifest itself in unexpected and even absurd ways in extreme situations. Ronnie, facing his own death, refused to accept that his last meal would be less than perfect, a kind of silent defiance of the sentence that awaited him. His refusal, the gesture of spitting on the plate at the sight of the onion, is a dramatic way of asserting his identity and power, even knowing that little could change his fate. It is the ultimate act of rebellion, the cry of a man who needs to feel in control, whatever the cost. This extreme need for control, this obsession with detail, is part of the complex mental transformation that occurs in the minds of many convicts. When time is running out, decisions are no longer merely rational. They carry enormous emotional and symbolic weight. Food becomes a stage where a silent battle unfolds between the desire for self-affirmation and the inevitability of loss. Ronnie not only chose what he wanted to eat, but also imposed rigid limits that reflected his mindset, a mind shaped by years of internal conflict, violence, and above all, a relentless pursuit of power. The rejection of the onion may seem trivial, but it's a precious clue to the psychological impact of approaching death. It's a clear demonstration of how these men's final decisions are charged with meaning, even when they seem superficial to outsiders. Psychologically, these gestures expose the internal struggle, the confrontation between a wounded ego and relentless reality. Ronnie, in his final request, shows that even the cruelest of the condemned can cling to fragments of humanity, or at least to the illusion of humanity that insists on remaining alive. Exploring this narcissistic profile means understanding that these men's ultimate behavior isn't simply a result of their crimes, but of the complex interplay between their personality, the penal system, and the weight of the death sentence. Ronnie's plea reveals that, even on death row, the power game doesn't end. It remains on the table, on the plate, in the gesture of spitting, in a silent resistance that defies the imminent end. This is a moment where criminal psychology finds fertile ground for revealing the hidden layers of the human mind, those that blend arrogance, fear, defiance, and even a distorted form of dignity. And when we broaden our perspective on these moments, we begin to realize that the story of these last meals is much more than a tale of food. It's a narrative about identity, about how the impact of final decisions transcends the physical and reaches the emotional and symbolic. Every rejected ingredient, every complaint, every detail that doesn't live up to expectations becomes a fragment of a larger puzzle, the puzzle of the mental transformation these men face. Ronnie Lee Gardner, with her meticulous plea and her disdain for the onion, not only defies justice but also exposes one of the most human and, at the same time, disturbing sides of these final moments. Her story joins the others we've already heard, forming a mosaic that reveals how the final hours of life can be a battlefield where ego, fear, and hope intertwine in a cruel and unforgettable dance. As we delve deeper into these stories, we are faced with an irresistible invitation to understand the complexity that exists between the killer and the man, between the sentence and what remains of the human soul. Every detail, every reaction, is a key to unlocking the doors of this mystery that seems impossible to decipher, but which gradually reveals itself before us, with all its power and contradictions. And as these stories unfold before our eyes, it's impossible not to feel the weight of every word, every gesture filled with pain, frustration, and a desperate search for some kind of control. If any of these scenes, any of these details touched you, provoked that silent unease, a discomfort that doesn't easily dissipate, perhaps it's time to express it. Write in the comments a word, a phrase that represents what you felt upon hearing these final complaints, this final plea so full of meaning and contradiction. It could be loneliness, anger, fear, or even injustice, whatever comes from deep within, whatever needs to be said. This space isn't just for listening. It's for connecting, for building something that goes beyond simply consuming information. When you share your thoughts and emotions, you help create an invisible chain, a hidden sense of belonging where everyone recognizes they're not alone in their reflections on the darkest side of the human mind. It's a silent outpouring that strengthens both listeners and speakers, a real exchange that gives life and meaning to these disturbing stories. Understanding these stories is more than just solving crimes. It's delving into an emotional complexity that touches everyone in different, often unexpected ways. And when you leave your mark here in the comments, you're participating in this process, helping to keep this conversation alive that goes far beyond words, that connects people, that transforms doubts into profound reflections. It's a simple step, but one that has a profound impact on those who create this content and on those who seek answers in these narratives. So, feel free to share your thoughts, to release that feeling that's been stuck in your chest. Because that's the power of this space, to embrace what's difficult, what bothers, what makes you think. And as these stories continue to unfold, together we will understand the layers, the behind the scenes, the impacts that only time and the courage to look truth in the eye can reveal. And what comes next promises to open this universe even further, bringing new faces, new words, new silences, all loaded with meaning. Stay with me as we continue this journey, where every detail matters, and where what seems small can be the key to a greater understanding of what really happens when the end is closer than ever. Alan Lee Davis entered the shadows of history not only as a convicted criminal, but as someone who, until the end, transformed his own death into a theatrical act, a performance laden with symbolism and provocation. Convicted of rape and murder, he knew his final moments would be accompanied by a ritual that many viewed with a mixture of resignation and fear: the last meal. For Davis, this moment was not just a simple meal, it was a stage where he could still exert some control, a shred of power that resisted the cruel fate that awaited him. The order was an almost luxurious selection: lobster, fries, shrimp, and strawberries. A combination that for many would be a final feast, a final treat before the final silence. But the reality he received was far from the perfection he had expected. The strawberries, so essential to the meal as he had imagined it, were missing from the plate. And there, in that detail, Davis saw more than a logistical failure. He saw an affront, a breach in the ritual that for him meant more than nourishment. "Is this a joke? I expected more." These words echo like a cry of indignation that goes beyond the obvious. It wasn't just the lack of strawberries that disturbed him, it was what it represented to him, what it symbolized in that moment when every second counted. The last meal for Davis was a kind of ritualistic farewell, a way to maintain a semblance of dignity, to defy death with a final show of will. The absence of such a simple element seemed to invalidate the entire process, as if the imperfection on that table could lessen the impact of the approaching end. This reaction leads us to a profound reflection on the mindset of those facing the end of the line. What might seem like a whim, an insignificant detail to an outside observer, is actually a powerful symbol within that context. For Alan Lee Davis, death was a spectacle, and the last meal, a final chance to control a narrative that had largely slipped from his grasp. His indignation at this failure reveals not only vanity, but an internal conflict, a clash between the will to remain master of his own destiny and the relentless reality that reduced him to a mere spectator. Exploring this dimension is crucial to understanding the hidden layers of these men's final decisions. They're not just asking for food. They're trying, somehow, to preserve their identity, their autonomy, even when everything seems to be falling apart. This quest for control is a transformation that occurs in the human mind in the face of imminent death, a profound psychological impact that goes far beyond the physical and manifests itself in the smallest details, in gestures, in words that may seem trivial but carry immense weight. As we delve behind the scenes of this episode, we begin to uncover revelations that the penal system rarely exposes. The failure to deliver the last meal may seem like a logistical failure, but for Davis, it was an emotional wound, a breach of what he considered sacred in his final passage. It's a hidden truth that is rarely spoken of, but one that has a direct impact on the mindset and decisions of these convicts. And understanding this impact is essential to comprehending the multiple dimensions of the death penalty, its effects, and its psychological consequences. Davis's performance, his complaint and resentment at the incomplete dish, reveal an internal struggle marked by the contradiction between acceptance of the end and the desire to defy what seemed inevitable. It's a complex dance between ego and vulnerability, between the monstrous and the human, where every gesture carries a meaning charged with emotion and symbolism. And it's this complexity that makes these stories so fascinating, so unsettling, because they force us to look beyond appearances to what really happens when time is running out. As Alan Lee Davis silently protested the absence of strawberries, he left us with a valuable lesson about the power of details and the importance of final decisions. These moments are small fragments of a larger truth, essential clues to piecing together the puzzle of the human mind at its most extreme. They show us how the emotional impact of imminent death transforms even the simplest requests into manifestations of identity and resilience. John Wayne Gacy, known as the Killer Clown, carried a story that blended darkness and a strange normalcy, as if his mind were trapped between two opposing worlds. He killed 33 young people, a number that already defines one of the darkest chapters in criminology. But in his final moments, it was a seemingly simple detail that caught everyone's attention: his complaint about his last meal. He ordered fried chicken, strawberries, and fries, a combination that might seem ordinary, even comforting. However, the phrase he uttered had an almost surreal impact. It should have been Kentucky Fried Chicken. This comment reveals a disturbing, yet human side. His sense of taste was anchored in the past, in a time before darkness took hold, before the pain he himself inflicted consumed him. John Wayne Gacy had been Pogo the Clown at children's parties, a character who hid a monstrous face behind makeup and a fake smile. The reference to the restaurant where he worked is a return to what he recognized as familiar, a fragment of his identity before the transformation that plunged him into darkness. This connection to the past, a past in which he was just an ordinary man with simple tastes, a routine, a life that, behind the facade, was about to fall apart, reveals much about the mentality behind the final acts of many convicts. The last meal, then, is not just a gastronomic request, but an attempt to reconnect, even if only for a few minutes, with a version of themselves that seemed lost forever. It is a symbolic return, a temporary refuge amidst inner chaos. Gacy's seemingly trivial complaint is a window into the psychological impact of condemnation and the expectation of death. He doesn't just reject the taste of food. He rejects the disconnect between his memory and present reality, between who he was and who he has become. It's a clear manifestation of the mental transformation these men face, a continual struggle to preserve some part of themselves that still feels tangible, an attempt to control a narrative that is slipping away. This conflict between past and present, between memory and reality, is a hidden truth that few can see clearly. Gacy, by complaining about his last meal, gives us a glimpse into the backstage of a condemned man's mind, a space filled with fragments, unresolved pain, and decisions made amid the whirlwind of an exhausting existence. The last meal ceases to be merely a moment before death and becomes a reflection of the emotional and psychological complexity these men carry. The impact of these revelations goes beyond the surface. Understanding what motivates these small complaints and gestures is to get in touch with the most human and contradictory side of the crime. It's realizing that, behind the monster, there's a man trapped in a distorted mindset, struggling to find meaning in his final moments. The tension between his wounded ego and the truth of the sentence creates fertile ground for revelations that challenge our convictions and open space for profound reflection. John Wayne Gacy, by insisting that his fried chicken wasn't like Kentucky Fried chicken leaves a mark that goes far beyond taste. He confronts us with the transformation that time and events imprint on the human mind, with decisions that, even in the face of death, carry intense emotional and symbolic weight. It's a reminder that the final hours are not just about physical death, but about the psychological impact, the struggle for control, and the desperate search for some form of dignity. Stay with me until the end, because this journey still holds hidden layers, stories that reveal how the simplest decisions can hold the greatest secrets. What follows will deepen this vision and challenge your perceptions of what truly happens when time is running out and the past meets the present in a moment that seems suspended between life and death. This is the opportunity to peer into the shadows and discover truths few dare explore. And this conversation is far from over. Timothy McVeigh carried one of the most controversial and iconic names in recent American criminal history. Responsible for the explosion that took the lives of 168 people, including children, he became synonymous with a terror that shook the entire country. However, in his final moments, his attention seemed focused on something many might consider trivial or even shocking, given the gravity of his actions. He asked for 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. A simple, almost childish request, but one that took on an unexpected dimension when the ice cream they brought him was the wrong one. McVeigh refused. This reaction provokes immediate discomfort, a moral shock that's difficult to digest. How could someone capable of such colossal destruction care about the flavor of the ice cream they're about to eat for the last time? The outrage this episode evokes isn't just a matter of taste, it reveals a hidden truth, an aspect of the human mind that resists easy explanations. What might seem like a contradiction or an affront to justice is actually a window into the psychological impact that the proximity of death has on even the coldest and most calculating criminals. This scene reveals how the human mind clings to small details when faced with the end. It is the manifestation of the desire for control in its purest and seemingly absurd form. McVeigh, at the height of his destructive power, even knowing the weight of his actions, was searching in that moment for something he could shape, choose, and dominate. The flavor of the ice cream, its texture, its precision, became symbols of a last-ditch attempt to preserve autonomy in the face of the inevitable. It is the transformation of the mind that begins to value the minuscule, the immediate, the tangible, while the larger world crumbles around it. Furthermore, this episode raises a powerful controversy: the contrast between the cruelty of the crimes and the fragility of the final demands. It's a paradox that deconstructs simplistic narratives about evil and punishment. Timothy McVeigh, who caused so much suffering, did not escape the basic human need for comfort, even if that comfort was reduced to a specific ice cream cone. This dichotomy is what makes studying these final hours so fascinating and disturbing. We are faced with a complex interplay between monstrosity and humanity, between horror and the everyday, between destruction and the desire for something simple and sweet. This clash between extreme acts and seemingly banal details is what brings to light the most profound revelations about the mindsets of the condemned. They are not one-dimensional figures, but human beings undergoing an intense mental transformation, where small decisions take on enormous symbolic weight. Their final choices become reflections of the emotional impact that the death sentence leaves on the psyche, a silent battle between ego, pain, and the search for dignity, even if that dignity is confined to a pint of ice cream. By exploring this facet of McVeigh, we get a glimpse behind the scenes of a troubled mind, whose final movements aren't limited to the obvious or the expected. His desire for a specific ice cream, his refusal to accept wrongdoing, shows that, even in the deepest abyss of crime, there's a need for order, predictability, and control over what's still possible. It's a revelation that challenges prejudices, that questions our certainties about justice and humanity. These seemingly simple decisions offer us a map for understanding What happens when time runs out and masks begin to fall? Timothy McVeigh provides us with an extreme example of how the emotional impact of the final hours can manifest in unexpected ways, from the brutality of his crimes to the demanding delicacy of his final wish. It's an invitation to reflect on the complexity of the human mind in the face of death, and the hidden truths that only emerge when life hangs by a thread. These men, who took lives without a shred of mercy, showed in the final moment an unexpected vulnerability, trembling at the wrong seasoning, complaining about something that, to the rest of the world, would seem insignificant. But it's not about the food. It never was. It's about control. About the last spark of power they had left when there was no one left to kill, no place to run. What seemed like arrogance, a bizarre whim, reveals a deeper truth: desperation disguised as taste. The desperate attempt to hold on to the reins of one's own existence at a moment when everything slips away. In the killer's cold gaze, the last meal becomes a silent battle, a belated affirmation of, "I am still me, even as time runs out and the voices around me announce the end." Have you ever wondered what the mind of someone trapped between life and death is like, feeling the weight of every passing second? What do final requests truly reveal about the transformation occurring within, in the mind that once planned, killed, and dominated? The impact of these details forces us to question more than the surface. It takes us deeper into a labyrinth of decisions, pain, and hidden truths that justice sometimes ignores. If you've made it this far, it's perhaps because you're seeking answers where the world has only left scars. It's not just about crime. It's about understanding human complexity, the mystery hidden in the silence of the condemned. It's about finding meaning between the lines, in the smallest gestures, in the whispered words before the final silence. And if these dark truths resonate with you, perhaps it's time to join those who also want to see beyond the obvious, those who aren't content with simplistic explanations. Here, what matters is the search for understanding, for revealing the inner workings of the human mind when it teeters on the brink of the abyss. If you've made it this far, it's because this story touched something deep inside you, that restlessness that won't let us close our eyes to what's been left in silence. If any part of this journey resonated, if you felt the depth of these words, leave a phrase that resonated with you in the comments. Something like, "I'm with you until the end," or "This message was for me." It's in this space that we create a real connection, a place where justice seems a little less distant and hidden truths are given a voice. And if this conversation made you think, awakened you to what lies beyond the surface, a natural like here shows that this search for meaning, for understanding what lies behind the obvious, matters, that we are not alone in this mission to unveil what the world tries to hide. It's our silent way of resisting, of taking one more step against what tries to be erased in the shadows. There's a video here that complements all this, delving even deeper into these mysteries and the transformations that only those who face the truth know. Click and stay with me there, because this journey is made up of chapters, and each one brings a little more of what the world doesn't want us to know. I'll wait for you.